Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive with us.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be unpacking why we seem to attract certain types of people and
Mhm.
situations into our lives. And it's
Right.
kind of like, you can feel like you get stuck in this loop.
Yeah.
Like, you ever felt like you keep dating the same kind of person,
Mhm.
even when the relationship always ends badly?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to explore this using an excerpt from a talk that's all about the subconscious mind.
It's amazing how much our subconscious influences our choices, and this talk really dives deep into that.
It really does. And,
Yeah.
instead of just focusing on the why of these patterns, the speaker actually offers some really practical advice
Yeah.
for like
Mm.
how to break free from them.
Absolutely. And they start off by saying that our external reality is a reflection of our internal world.
Oh, that's interesting.
What's fascinating here is that this idea suggests that we are not just passive recipients of our experiences, but active creators of them.
Okay, so what does that mean for us in a practical sense?
Well, the speaker argues that when we say we're looking for a specific person, what we're often really longing for is a specific pattern. You
Yeah.
see these patterns get ingrained in us sometimes from early childhood experiences, and they continue to play out in our adult lives.
So it's less about the individual person and more about that like familiar
It's
dynamic.
exactly. Think about it this way. Have you ever found yourself wanting something or someone, even when deep down you knew it wasn't good for you?
Oh, totally. All the time.
Right.
And what's even more interesting is that these patterns can pop up in like all areas of our lives, not just romantic relationships.
Yeah.
The speaker actually shares a story about renting a house
Yeah.
that illustrates this perfectly.
Yes. They describe renting this beautiful house, but the landlord turned out to be incredibly controlling.
Yeah, story's wild. The landlord was so meticulous that even the cleaning lady was terrified of doing something wrong.
Right. And remember the hot chocolate incident?
Oh, yeah. The speaker accidentally spilled some hot chocolate on the counter, and it ended up costing them a fortune because the landlord insisted on replacing the entire countertop.
Oh my God.
It's almost comical, but also kind of disturbing.
Right. What's striking about this anecdote is that it reveals how easily we can slip into familiar patterns, even when they cause us stress and discomfort.
So the question becomes, what was it about the speaker that drew them to this situation in the first place?
Yeah.
They clearly saw some red flags early on, but still decided to rent the house.
They admit that they acknowledge ignoring those warning signs because they were so focused on getting the house.
Yeah.
It highlights how our desire for something can blind us to potential
I could
problems.
definitely relate to that. It's like when you're dating someone
Right.
and you see those early signs of trouble, but you convince yourself it's not a big deal because you're smitten.
Exactly.
It almost feels like that need to maintain that pattern of attraction
Mm-hmm.
is stronger than the desire to avoid the potential problems.
And the speaker actually draws a parallel between the controlling landlord and their childhood experiences with a controlling stepmother.
Oh, wow.
What's fascinating about this connection is that it suggests that we might subconsciously recreate uncomfortable situations because they feel familiar on some level.
So in a way, we're drawn to what we know, even if what we know isn't necessarily good for us.
It's not always a conscious choice. These subconscious patterns are like well-worn paths in our brains. It takes conscious effort to recognize them and choose a different route.
That makes a lot of sense. But if it's happening on a subconscious level, how do we even begin to become aware of these patterns?
Well, the speaker actually offers a few key insights into that. One of the things they emphasize is the importance of paying attention to our feelings. If we consistently feel anxious, drained, or resentful in certain situations, it might be a sign that a subconscious pattern is at play.
So instead of ignoring those feelings or brushing them off, we need to actually stop and ask ourselves, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way?
Exactly. Those feelings are valuable clues that can help us uncover those deeper patterns that are driving our behavior.
This is already giving me a lot to think about. I bet our listeners are feeling the same way.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive. Welcome back. Before we went to break, we were talking about how, like, our past experiences can create these subconscious patterns that play out in our adult lives. The speaker's story about the controlling landlord
Yeah.
really highlights this, doesn't it?
It does. And what's interesting is that they actually describe feeling a sense of comfort in that dynamic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they talk about walking on eggshells around the landlord, just like they did with their stepmother growing up, and how it felt strangely familiar, almost safe.
That's so fascinating. Why would we seek out experiences that make us feel uncomfortable or unsafe? It seems so counterintuitive.
Right, but the speaker offers a really insightful explanation for this. They suggest that sometimes we subconsciously recreate these situations because they feel familiar to our nervous system. Like our brains know how to navigate these dynamics, even if they're not healthy, because they're what we're used to.
It's like when you go back to visit your childhood home,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't the happiest place.
Yeah.
There's this strange sense of comfort in the familiarity of it all. Like,
Yeah.
where everything is, how things work, even if it wasn't a great environment.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to seek out patterns and predictability, even if those patterns are rooted in negative experiences. And that's where the work of self-awareness comes in. We have to start recognizing these patterns so we can choose to break free from them.
So instead of just reacting automatically based on those old patterns, we need to learn to choose our responses more consciously.
Yes, the speaker talks about not letting ourselves get pulled back into those old ways of reacting. They share a really powerful example of this from their own life. Remember how they wrote that letter confronting the landlord? Well, they ended up having a phone call with her after that, and it got pretty heated.
Oh, I bet it's hard to imagine that conversation was very pleasant.
It wasn't. The speaker admits that they got caught up in the back and forth for a while, reacting defensively to the landlord's accusations. But eventually they realized they were just feeding the drama, giving the landlord exactly what she wanted, a reaction. They were falling back into that old pattern of trying to please an authority figure.
It sounds like a classic power struggle.
Yeah.
So how do they break free from that dynamic?
They realized they had a choice. They could either keep engaging in the argument or they could choose to disengage. And ultimately, they chose to end the conversation.
So they didn't necessarily win the argument, but they won their peace of mind.
Exactly. And they realized that sometimes the most powerful response is to simply withdraw your energy from a situation that's no longer serving you. It's like refusing to play the game anymore.
That's such a powerful lesson, and I think it applies to so many different areas of our lives. Sometimes the best thing we can do is walk away from a situation that's just draining us.
Absolutely. And what I find really inspiring is that even though the speaker recognizes they could have handled things differently, they don't beat themselves up about it. They actually celebrate the fact that they had the courage to speak up at all, even if it wasn't perfect.
I think that's such a healthy perspective. It's about progress, not perfection.
Hmm.
We're all learning and growing, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way.
It is. And ultimately, this experience reinforces the core message of the talk. We have the power to choose how we respond to the patterns that show up in our lives. It's an ongoing journey of awareness, growth, and transformation.
This is all making me think about a pattern I've noticed in my own life. It seems like I often attract people who need a lot of emotional support. I'm always the one listening to everyone's problems, offering advice and trying to help them feel better.
That's really interesting. What do you think draws you to these types of individuals?
I think part of it is that I'm just a naturally empathetic person. I can easily tune into other people's emotions and I feel compelled to help them. But I'm starting to realize that sometimes I end up giving more than I receive in these relationships. And it can be draining. It's like I'm constantly pouring from my own cup without ever taking the time to refill it.
It definitely sounds like you're starting to recognize a pattern that might not be serving you in the long run. What's great is that you're starting to question it. That's the first step towards making a change. Have you ever thought about why you feel compelled to take on this caretaking role?
I've never really analyzed it before, but now that you mention it, that made me wonder, it's possible I'm subconsciously seeking out these relationships to fulfill a need within myself, maybe a need to feel needed or valued. It's something I'm definitely going to explore further.
It can be really helpful to examine those underlying motivations. Sometimes we're drawn to certain dynamics because they're fulfilling a need that we're not even consciously aware of. And once we become aware of that need, we can start finding healthier ways to meet it.
It's almost like we're trying to solve an internal problem with an external solution.
Exactly. And while it might work temporarily, it's not a sustainable solution in the long run. It's also worth considering whether this pattern might be connected to any experiences from your past. Have you always been the caretaker in your relationships?
Now that you mention it, growing up, I was often the one looking after my younger siblings. My parents worked long hours, so I kind of stepped into that role of taking care of everyone. It's possible that's where this pattern originated.
That's a really valuable insight. This is the beauty of exploring these subconscious patterns. It can help us connect the dots between our past experiences and our present-day behaviors. It's like putting together a puzzle, and as we uncover more pieces, the bigger picture starts to become clearer.
It's definitely giving me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are finding all these insights helpful as they reflect on their own lives and the patterns they might be playing out.
It's all about becoming more conscious and intentional in our choices, isn't it? We don't have to be victims of our past or our subconscious programming. We have the power to choose a different path.
And I think that's such an empowering message. It's not about blaming ourselves or dwelling on the past, but about recognizing those patterns and making conscious choices to move forward in a more positive direction. We've covered so much ground today, but I'm curious to hear the speaker's final thoughts on how we can break free from these patterns and create lasting change. Welcome back to our deep dive. It's incredible how these patterns can influence our relationships and experiences, sometimes without us even realizing it. I'm really eager to hear how the speaker suggests we actually break free from these patterns, once we've become aware of them. What do we do with that awareness?
It's refreshing that the speaker doesn't offer a quick fix or a magic formula.
Right.
Instead, they emphasize that this is an ongoing process of self-discovery and growth.
So it's not as simple as flipping a switch then.
Not at all. It's about becoming more conscious of our thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors.
Hmm.
It's about making choices that align with who we truly want to be.
So it's less about eradicating these patterns altogether and more about transforming our relationship with them.
Exactly. The speaker makes the point that these patterns often served a purpose at some point in our lives. Maybe they were coping mechanisms or survival strategies that helped us navigate challenging situations.
That makes sense. As children, we don't always have the tools or resources to deal with difficult emotions or situations in healthy ways.
Right, but as we evolve, those patterns may no longer be necessary or beneficial.
Okay.
They might even be holding us back from experiencing greater happiness and fulfillment.
It's like those old jeans you keep in the back of your closet.
Yeah.
They might have fit you perfectly once, but now they're just taking up space and preventing you from embracing new styles.
I love that analogy. And just like those old jeans, sometimes we need to let go of these outdated patterns to make room for something new and better.
So how do we start shifting these patterns in a practical way?
Mhm.
The speaker talked about choosing our response, but I'm wondering what that looks like in a real-life situation.
Well, the first step is awareness, like we talked about. The speaker encourages us to really pay attention to the situations and people that trigger us, to notice the thoughts and emotions that arise in those moments. It's like becoming a detective in your own life.
Observing those patterns without judgment.
Yes. Once we become aware of the pattern, we can start to choose a different response. It might involve setting boundaries, communicating our needs more assertively, or simply walking away from a dynamic that no longer serves us. It's about taking back our power.
So instead of just reacting automatically, we pause, observe, and then decide how we want to engage or not engage with the situation.
It takes practice.
Right.
Of course, these patterns are often deeply ingrained, so it's not always easy to change them overnight.
Right.
But with consistent effort, we can start to rewire our brains and create new, healthier patterns.
It sounds like it takes a lot of courage to break free from these deeply ingrained patterns, especially when they've been with us for so long.
It does, and that's why the speaker also encourages us to seek support. We don't have to do this alone.
Yeah.
Talking to a therapist, a coach, or even a trusted friend can provide invaluable guidance and encouragement along the way.
Having that support system can make such a difference.
And remember, as the speaker emphasized, this is not about perfection, it's about progress.
Mm.
It's about taking small steps each day to align our lives with our deepest values and desires.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And like any journey, there will be ups and downs, twists and turns. But with patience, persistence, and self-compassion, we can create lasting change.
This deep dive has been so insightful. I'm walking away with a renewed sense of awareness about the patterns in my own life and a greater understanding of how I can start to transform them.
Me too. It's empowering to realize that we have more power than we often think to shape our experiences and create a reality that truly reflects who we are.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. What patterns are you noticing in your own life? What people or situations keep showing up? And what might those patterns be trying to tell you about yourself? Take some time to reflect on these questions and see what insights emerge. Until next time, keep diving deep.